Okay, so we talked about carbon, we talked about thermal environments, now let's talk about water. We are mostly water. Forget the percentage. Anybody got that fact in their brain?
I think like 70.
70? So we're mostly water. We're a high percentage of water. More so now because we can't walk around without our water bottle. I have a water bottle in my office. But we gain, how do we gain? Well, first of all, I guess I should say, if you don't remember what solutes are, those are the things that are mixed in the water. We like to call them things like electrolytes, right? So if we're exercising, we don't just drink water. We want to drink Gatorade because it's got electrolytes. Right? Then my sister drinks like Power or something.
Powerade.
Powerade. No, it's not Powerade. It's like Core. I don't know. It comes in banana. Anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah, they like it. That's what they're into. She gave me one. She goes, "Oh, you're gonna love it," because I do like banana runs are like my favorite. Like I love banana runs, which is fake banana flavored. And banana moon pies are the best moon pie. Anywho, she thought I would like it. I thought it was pretty terrible. Whatever it is, I thought it was terrible. And so that's what it means here by solutes, which is also very important. If your electrolytes get off, then you end up having electrical problems, which can affect the way that you think and your muscle contractions and stuff. And so while I'll probably continue to say we're talking about water, we really are talking about water and having the proper balance of electrolytes in that water. Okay. So how do we as animals gain water?
Drinking it.
Well, you drink it.
Eating food.
Yeah, we eat food. This morning I had cherries. They had water in them. Yum. And then also your metabolism. Right? We do create a lot of metabolic water. And so for us, we tend to think mostly about drinking and eating. And there are some animals that live in desert environments in which they can get all the food they need from eating seeds, for example. And then there are some organisms that depend upon metabolism to get their water. So your camels, for example, store a lot of fat in their hump. And then as they break down that fat, it releases water and allows them to get through dry periods. And so metabolism is a very important source of water for some organisms. How do we lose water?
Sweating.
Sweating. Secretions of various types. I'm sorry to say that did not make the list. If we were doing Family Feud, it would be a meh. But I agree with you, but I'm going to go with meh. Yeah, when you blow your nose when you have the cold, that's a lot of fluid that you lose, for sure. What's one of the main ways you get rid of excess water? Yeah, you go pee-pee. And you reclaim most of your water, but you'd still lose some when you go poo-poo, poopay, right? And then on a really, really cold day, when you're walking across campus, you can see your breath, right? That's through respiration. And that's happening right now too, you just can't see it. And so every time you breathe out, you're also losing water. So that's our big ones. The proper names for pee-pee and poopay, urine and feces. And then evaporation, I guess that will get your secretions, but that's sweating, wallowing, stuff like that. And respiration are the big ways that we lose water. And then the last bullet on this slide, I think needs a little bit of explanation, and that is the system that maintains water balance in animals is called the excretory system. In humans, we tend to talk about water balance, and we specifically talk about the urinary system. But in a lot of animals, it's not completely separated, their excretory, what they are excreting from their body. So excretory system is a more general term, urinary system is more specific, is what I'm trying to say. So most of our hormones that help us regulate our water balance and stuff for us are coming from the kidney and the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidney, essentially. Okay, so now we go to the next slide, unless you have any questions about how we gain and lose water. All right, this one talks a little bit about osmoregulation, and it uses the example of saltwater fish versus freshwater fish, and the different pressures that they encounter in living in those different environments. But what it's really doing, even though this is pretty textbook example here, but what it's really trying to do is to get you to think about osmosis again, how osmosis works, and how we gain and lose water, essentially. That's the point of the example. And so if you have a fish that is living in salt water, then essentially it's like making country ham. How do you make country ham? You smear it with salt. Yeah, you just smear it with so much salt, it pulls all the water out of it. That's what's happening to a fish, or what would happen if it didn't have regulatory mechanisms to counteract it, when they live in salt water. And so their main problem is getting fresh water, right? Getting water that they can actually use, and getting rid of excess salts. And so they'll have salt glands and stuff like that to help them combat it. In the freshwater, they have the opposite problem. They have trouble maintaining their electrolytes. And so they have to have cells that help them retain their electrolytes while they get rid of all the excess water that they're taking on. So they have different problems. All right, I have a YouTube link here on the bottom. And this video that we're gonna watch, it's like, I don't know, middle school level, grade school level. But I kind of like it, it's kind of funny. So we're gonna watch it. Hopefully we'll watch it. They're talking and we're hearing nothing, so we'll see what we can do there. Whoops, that just made me go black then. Yep.
Salt inside of their bodies. Freshwater fish have more salt inside of them, but less salt.
There we go.
Did you know that freshwater fish urinate more than saltwater fish? It might sound crazy, but it's true. Like other animals, fish have salt inside of their bodies. Freshwater fish have more salt inside of them, but less salt outside in the water where they live. Water travels from places where there is more water per area to places where there is less water per area. In this case, there is more water per area outside the fish than inside the fish. While the salt has to stay put inside the fish, the water can travel through the fish's skin and into its body to keep things balanced. This process is called osmosis. And if it continues, the fish could die from taking in too much water. To make sure this doesn't happen, the fish needs to get rid of excess water. And this is why freshwater fish will urinate more than saltwater fish.
That's all it has. Doesn't really do the saltwater fish part. I like the toilet, that's my favorite part. What now? You're looking at my... what comes up on my computer. Whoops, I just pulled up the same thing. What are we doing? We're doing this. Alrighty. Alright. So, if you live in an environment in which you have trouble getting water, an arid environment, what can you do? Well, one thing you can do is just evade the drought. And if you're, there's really two ways of doing that. I just have a different slide for each one. And so one way you can evade the drought is have a migration. And so I mentioned bird migration in North America earlier, and birds are migrating based on the season, where they are here during the summer and then they migrate south during the winter. However, in different parts of the world, their cycles aren't necessarily governed by changes in season. In fact, in many of these areas, they don't have a big change in season because they're tropical or subtropical. And instead, their annual cycles are going to be the wet season versus the dry season. Okay, so that's the type of situation we're talking about. This is showing you water buffalo in Africa. All right, and so in Africa, there's this big river that runs down kind of the center of Africa. It's called the Okavango River. And it's one of the rivers that actually ends in the continent rather than reaching the ocean. And the Okavango River ends at the top of the Kalahari Desert, which is in the southern part of Africa. And it forms the Okavango Delta. So the Okavango Delta is actually dry for a big part of the year. And then I think it's 5 months, it's 4 or 5 months before they get water in the Okavango Delta, it starts raining. They have a monsoon season in the northern part of the reaches of the river, and it takes that long for the water to work its way down and fill the Okavango itself. And so the animals know this cycle, and so they'll migrate out as the delta dries, and then they'll come back in large numbers like this when the delta fills with water again. It's pretty awesome. I went, I'll show you some pictures sometime maybe. And we went in November, which is spring in the Okavango. And so the water was just arriving and the animals were arriving in large numbers. And what was so interesting to me is it didn't rain there, right? For us to have a flood, we have to have a lot of rain, right? But this is floods that took place well north of where we were. Occasionally, because of all the water coming into the area, we would get a little sprinkle maybe about sunset, but that's it. So you're basically driving around in a desert with plentiful water that came from somewhere else. It's a really interesting system. But we saw big herds of water buffalo like this coming into the area. The elephants come into the area. It's a really, really cool time of year. Everything looked, that fresh green that we have in the spring, everything looked like that. Even though it wasn't raining, they're pulling water from the ground, from the water tables and things to do that. It's just kind of a crazy system, very different from our own. Okay, so one thing you can do is migration. Another thing you can do is a fancy word, estivation. Estivation. And that is you can go dormant during the drought. Go dormant during the drought. So I learned about estivation when I was a kid because somebody gave me sea monkeys. Anybody raise sea monkeys? Oh yeah, just one person. I find that it's fewer and fewer every year. A lot of times it's none. When I have a kid in my life, you know, like my cousin's kid, that kind of thing, once they get to the right age, I buy all of them sea monkeys. You can still get them online. And what you get is a little bitty aquarium. It's not very big at all. It's got these bubbles on it, which are magnifying glasses, so you can look in there and magnify what's on the inside. And then you get a little packet of sea monkeys. And what they really are either brine shrimp or fairy shrimp, which is a desert species that goes dormant when depressions in the desert are dry, so they're not much more than just dust. And then when it rains and that depression fills with water, they become active, they swim around, they do their whole life cycle before the puddle dries back up, and then they go back into a dormant stage. And they're very good at being dormant. They put them in the little freeze-dried, not freeze-dried, but packets. They suck them out, vacuum-sealed, there we go, vacuum-sealed packets. And you open them up, and you put them in there, and within a few days, you start seeing little things bouncing around in there, and they give you some little food so you can feed them. Mine got pretty big. It had a little book that came with them, and it said you could train them. And so you would take a flashlight and you would train them to move around their tank. You're not training them, right? That's some type of inbred behavior that they already had, right? But it was fun. I was little. And then my sister knocked him over and I lost my sea monkey in the carpet somewhere, which means it still could be there, right? Because it probably went into estivation.
Your house is ever flooded?
Yeah, if it ever floods, there might be a sea monkey in there. Who knows? We haven't lived in that house in a really long time. So that's one example, and if you're interested, I always thought, like, sometimes I'm in charge of the freshman labs, and I always thought it would be interesting to start them at the beginning of the freshman lab so they could watch them kind of weekly and take some notes on them. Watch them wake up and do their thing. Maybe I'll do it, I'm probably about to take over non-majors. Non-majors would like that, right?
Yeah.
All right, another example is the lungfishes. And so let's watch this video about lungfishes. They're pretty interesting critters. Get it going. You see anything behind me?
Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. New
does make them
Zaxby's
look
chicken
tasty.
finger tacos.
Oh no! We don't want to see that again.
Did you know that freshwater fish
Oh, I
urinate
fixed
more
it.
than saltwater
Did I not
fish?
pick it up?
It might sound crazy,
No, I
but it's true. Like other
It's true. Yeah, this is a completely different kind of video.
Oh,
Why am I going back to the fish?
I don't know. I think you put the wrong link in.
I picked it up. Let's see if it boiled.
Oh, yeah, it's different on the campus one.
So somehow I've lost my link. That's what you're telling. I wonder if I cut and pasted it accidentally. No, quit it! 20-second story of osmosis.
It's a good show. Where the pictures from, it's a good show. We might actually like it. He can eat a
Nothing's
lot of meat
working.
fish
Let's see if I accidentally picked it up.
from all over the world. Usually towards Africa.
That's it, right? You switch back to the right link.
Yeah.
Alright, let's try this again.
It should.
There we go.
Yay!
Southern Africa is home to a very primitive fish with some extraordinary abilities. It's the lungfish, and while it has gills like any other fish, it can also breathe air directly using a modified swim bladder that acts as a lung. When water levels are high, this isn't so important, but the rains will eventually fail, and the constant burning sun will dry up all the water. Fish are left flapping at the surface as the waters disappear. Only the air-gulping lungfish is able to cope with these extreme conditions, but it's still exposed to the heat and is still at risk from predators. So it relies on another, even more extraordinary ability. It finds a new, safer home buried underground. Digging down by eating mud and pushing it out through its gills. To stop it drying out, the lungfish exudes a special mucus from its skin, covering itself in a thick layer that hardens to form a waterproof cocoon. Only a single hole is left for breathing. Baked into this mud sarcophagus, the lungfish slows its metabolism to 1/60th of its original rate, relying on its muscles and body fat as a source of food and water. It becomes just another piece of hardened mud. And lungfish have even been known to end up as an accidental brick in a mud hut wall. But this isn't the end for the lungfish. It can survive like this for an incredible 4 years. Eventually, it could end up poisoned by its own waste products. But in this case, the onset of the rains is its salvation. As the mud walls are washed away, the lungfish's hard mucus lining is softened. It's been 4 years since it last used its muscles, and they're very weak. But as it breaks free of this mud cocoon, it still manages to drag itself towards the nearest source of water. It's the ultimate survivor. And although it's underwater now, it'll soon be back in the mud, repeating the whole process again and again as the annual rains come and go.
I knew I was underwater. I just didn't realize I was this underwater. If you're stressed about your paper, just get Grammarly.
Okay,
It's perfect. You don't need better grammar and get an A on this essay. Grammarly can help with that. It'll start
I have one problem. I like that we see the lungfishes moving and doing stuff in this video, but it should not be waiting 4 years, right? The idea this is an annual cycle. And so it should break out of its shell every year during the wet season and then go dormant or estivate every dry season. There are 2 species of lungfishes. There's one in South America and there's one in Africa. It's one of those ones that you learn about in biogeography as evidences that the 2 continents were once joined in a supercontinent. So it's kind of interesting. That always sticks out in my head when I think about lungfishes. All right. Another thing you can do, so the first thing you can do is evade the drought by either migrating or estivating. The second thing you can do is try to avoid the effects of the drought. And so this is your strategies for basically not being out during the heat of the day, except the oryx, which is the first bullet. But the second bullet, if you look at that, some rodents can lower their temperature of the air that they breathe out. Because cold air doesn't hold as much water as warm air, and so that helps them keep the water inside their body. And then some animals only come out at night. So if you're out in the desert and you want to see a lot of animals, then you need to be out at night, not during the day. Maybe dusk and dawn, but out at night, like snakes and things. The oryx, I've already mentioned, I think, already in this class. It's the one that becomes hyperthermic or allows its body temperature to go up higher than it should. That means it doesn't have to use as much water for evaporative cooling. It's energetically less demanding. And they just really look cool. Look at that. That's an oryx. Right? And so in other words, you can have physiological or behavioral adaptations. We talked about those when we discussed adaptations. So physiological adaptations here would be the hyperthermic, like the oryx, or it's basically a countercurrent cooling system that the rodents are using that allows them to maintain more water inside their body, not lose as much water, or behavioral, which is only come out at night when it's cooler. Right? So physiological or behavioral types of adaptations. Any questions about water? We didn't spend a lot of time on water, but it is very necessary. You gotta have it. As they look for life on other planets, what's the first thing they look for? Water. Waters and underwater volcanoes like the Ring of Fire, the hydrothermal vents, which is why they think there might be life in the hydrothermal vents in the, which one? Europa, the moon of Jupiter. We don't want fish PowerPoint. Our next big topic is going to be light. Light. And light has a big impact on us, and we're starting to understand that more and more. So for example, with the age of technology and us having cell phones and tablets and computers and things, TVs even, putting light into your eyeballs all the time, we're getting more and more recommendations that you quit doing that an hour before you want to go to sleep, stuff like that, because it does have a very powerful influence on us. And then it's going to regulate our annual cycles, our daily cycles. So I've already talked about what can happen to your thyroid today between the different seasons. And so therefore we're going to talk about light. All right. And so all organisms, except for bacteria, do have a circadian rhythm. And so circa means about, and dies means day. So this is your daily rhythm, circadian rhythm, your innate 24-hour rhythm. And then it looks like I have the different words for organisms that are active in different parts of the day. And so if you're active at night, you're referred to as nocturnal. If you're active during the daytime, then you are diurnal. And if you're only active at dusk and dawn, you are crepuscular. Okay. So it looks like I got those terms. And then it gives you an example of a flying squirrel, which is kind of interesting. Let's get it all up there so I don't get lost. So flying squirrels are naturally nocturnal, so they're out at night. That's when they're active. If you bring them into the lab and you put them in a room where you can control the light and dark periods, they will continue to be active during dark periods and inactive during light periods. And the reason why when we brought them into the lab, we're referring to them as dark periods and light periods is because we might want to flip day and night on them so that it's different from the outside environment to see if it has an effect, right? So in other words, do they know it's nighttime because it's dark or just because of the time of day? Do they have wristwatches and they know it's midnight? So even though it's light and it's midnight, they're still active. But that's not what happens. What happens is they're very much light triggered and they're only going to be active during dark periods and inactive during light periods. If you put the squirrel in constant darkness, though, it will continue to have active and inactive periods. However, it won't be exactly 24 hours. And that's something that we've studied quite a lot. You may have heard of some of the studies where they get volunteers, they get people, and they put them down in caves so that they're not able to experience the light and dark cycles. They're living in a dark environment, essentially. I think they do let them have lamps and things, but they don't give them clocks and they don't have any way to reset their timers. And what they find is humans also will get off sync. I think we go to like a 26 to 28 hour cycle rather than a 24-hour cycle if given our own means, like if you're controlling your cycle, essentially. Which is kind of interesting that happens. The importance of that, though, shows that we are able to reset our clocks according to what is happening in the environment. And so with environmental cues, that's what keeps our circadian rhythm on this 24-hour cycle. That's what I'm trying to say, I think. Any questions about that so far? All right. So I brought this in for just what I was talking about the use of all of these things that have light associated with them. And so this is a way to optimize your circadian rhythm. It's got midnight at the top, noon at the bottom. It says that you should get up at 6 a.m. And then you should go outside and be exposed to sunlight. Y'all hearing this? This is in the last couple of years, this is a really big deal. Another problem that we're having is that a lot of people are afraid of UV radiation for good reason. You know, you want to wear your sunscreen and stuff. But they're so afraid that they wear makeup that has UV protection and lip gloss that has UV protection. Everything is UV protected. And so when they go out into the sunshine, they're not getting the impact on their body that they should. You're not making the vitamin D like you're supposed to and stuff like that. And so what they really like for you to do is first thing in the morning, you know, grab your cup of coffee, or for me, my oatmeal with cherries, and go outside and experience the actual natural environment. And that works better than turning on the lights in your house. At some point, we'll talk about SAD, seasonal affective disorder, which is a big problem for people who live in northern latitudes where they have the extremely long nights and they have very little daylight. In those cases, they will use light boxes to try to stimulate a response from them to help alleviate some of the symptoms of SAD, but it still doesn't work as well as natural lighting would, okay? So that's where that's coming from. So your highest alertness should be right before around noon. That's probably right for me. All morning till about noon, I'm pretty alert. Your best coordination about that time of day. That's good. I'm gonna go to the gym after this, so it should be right on target there. Fastest reaction times, and then you should start limiting your caffeine. My general rule for me is 3 o'clock, no more caffeine. Cut it off. You should start dimming your lights after about 6 o'clock, so your environment's getting darker. Limit technology use well before you want to go to bed is going to be the best thing to do. And then, of course, sleeping. The blue line there is what they recommend for sleeping. So it's a little bit, actually, this one lets you sleep till 7, it looks like. And so this is what they're saying for sleeping. Mine, everybody's going to be different though. Mine is probably going to back up. I generally wake up around 6 naturally without an alarm. And I would guess some of you are the same, some of you are much later. It just depends.
I think the sunlight thing also is like, a lot of people think that they can just like sit by like an open window too.
Yeah, they're getting very specific. So not through a window, not an artificial source. You have to actually go out to get the full effects of the sunlight. You need to go out and expose yourself to the sunlight. Now you don't need to sit there until you sunburn. It's not very long that they want you to do it. But yeah, they want you to go out and get exposed to natural lighting.
So most of our classes can like pass through the like vitamins and stuff that you get from sunlight.
Yeah. And you know, things ebb and flow, and human health stuff is kind of interesting because we go through these fads and all this kind of stuff. And so, but right now, they supplement, like if you went to the doctor right now, they'd probably, and you told them you were feeling tired, they would probably check your vitamin D and then put you on a vitamin D supplement. That's pretty common right now. Or you could just go outside and play. But I will say for me, I'm much more energetic during the summertime. I'm outside a lot more. I want to be outside more. It's nice. This weekend, I plan to be outside the whole weekend. It's going to be awesome. In the winter, not only do we have shorter days, I typically am not outside as much. We have worse weather. It's cold. I don't want to sit out in my hammock when it's 30 degrees outside. That's not fun. And that does tend to affect your mood and complicate things. All right. So, we're going to talk a lot about cycles, this idea of free running cycles. So that's the number of hours from the beginning of period of activity one day to the beginning of activity the next day. So that's your free running cycle. It's a 24-hour cycle. It's left it open here so that we can apply this to lots of different systems. So for a flying squirrel, let's say it gets active at dusk one day, and then of course it has an activity period and then an inactivity period, and then it's going to get active at dusk the next day. So that would be one free running cycle. For us, we're supposed to be diurnal for the most part. And so for me, if, for example, I'll get up at 6 a.m., I'm active, I have an inactive period, and then at 6 a.m. the next morning, that would represent one cycle or one day, okay? So that's why the definition is so broad, so that we can accommodate lots of different cycles, different types of cycles. And a lot of what we discuss when we discuss free running cycles will be the amount of light and dark associated within that 24-hour period. Okay, the circadian rhythms have a strong genetic component and then therefore passed down from one generation to the next. God, I thought I took most of this stuff out. There we go. It's the animations. I forget to animate. So circadian rhythms, they have a strong genetic component. And the reason why we're talking about them is it's what allows organisms, in our case animals, to stay in sync with their environment, which is very important. There are two possible time setters. And I'm actually going on to the next slide, but I saw some people writing, so I didn't change it. So there are two possible time setters. The first one is temperature, and the second one is light. And the more we talk about these things, it will come back, and I will mention temperature from time to time. So for us, it typically is a little bit warmer during the day, it's a little bit colder at night. That's pretty typical. But the reality is that right now, we are going to be like 98 degrees one day, and then the next day we're going to be 78 degrees. That's where we're at. And so using temperature as your time setter is not very good. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. So it's not a very good time setter. And so our master time setter tends to be light, which is our main topic. This is a nice phrase. I like this phrase. Light brings your endogenous rhythms into phase with your exogenous rhythms. So your endogenous rhythms are your internal physiology, and the exogenous rhythms are what's happening in the world around you. So as we get more into the adaptations of having a circadian rhythm, and we're about to start talking about biological clocks on the next slide, the adaptive values of that are not just for you when you need to be active and when you need to be inactive. It also allows you to anticipate what's going to happen in your environment. And so if you're a nocturnal organism, probably one of the reasons why you have that innate tendency is because the food that you need is also nocturnal, right? So as it becomes dark, you're not just saying, oh, it's time for me to wake up. You're saying my food's about to wake up and I need to get up and go get it. Right? So there are adaptations to these cycles. Okay. So what's the difference between a circadian rhythm and a biological clock? Your biological clock is on a longer scale. This is across your lifetime, not from day to day. So your circadian rhythm is a 24-hour cycle. Your biological clock is the timekeeper of all your physical and physiological activity. And so this is where the biology terms we pretty much use correctly in popular culture, right? When a woman says her biological clock is ticking, and she is talking about physiological changes in her body. In multicellular organisms, the biological clock is usually associated with the brain. And by the way, breeding season versus non-breeding is definitely a part of your biological clock. But also, if you're an animal that migrates, that's controlled by your biological clock as well. Right? That's something that's a physiological change that happens in their body that causes them to want to migrate and do things. So it's also a part of your biological clock. And I'm sure there's other things as well, but those are two biggies. And so how do we know that the biological clock is in the brain? Well, we did some mad scientist experiments. That's what we tend to do. And so what they did, see, this makes it sound all nice. We did surgical procedures to locate the physiological clocks. Basically, they went in and they would destroy different parts of the brain of the animal to see which one affected what types of behaviors. That's what they did. And so in insects, they found that in the optic lobes and the tissues around the optic lobes, that tends to be their light setter area. That tends to be what regulates their circadian rhythms. in birds, it's located in the pineal or pineal, depending on who you have for the teacher. I tend to say pineal, I think, gland, which is the lower central part of the brain. And in mammals, it's tend to located as part of the hypothalamus, just above the optic chiasma. So chiasma means crossing. And so your optic nerves actually cross behind your eyes. And so this all makes sense, right? The optic nerves are responsible for sensing light and helping us to interpret what we're seeing. That's your vision, essentially. And so the part of the brain, the part of the hypothalamus that's closest to where that information is being collected tends to be associated with your ability to detect light and use that for your circadian rhythms and stuff. We think that the pineal gland also plays a role. The pineal gland is a little bit of a mystery as to what it actually does, but it has a lot of mysticism around it. And so a lot of times you'll have pictures of people with a third eye, and that third eye is often referring to the impacts of your pineal gland. In humans, we typically can't get permission to scramble different parts of the brain. In case y'all are wondering, just to be clear. It's pretty easy to get permission to scramble parts of an insect brain, not as easy to get permission to scramble parts of a human brain. Instead, what we tend to rely on is people who suffer brain injuries. People who've had a stroke, for example, or people who've had automobile accidents. When I was teaching A&P, there was a guy that was in an accident, I think he was working for the railroad, I think it was. And there was an explosion and it took one of the railroad pipes and put it through his head, and he survived. It didn't hit anything that I guess any of your automatic stuff like heart beating and stuff like that. But it completely changed his personality, which is why they were talking about it in the textbook. And so based on the parts of his brain that were damaged, they were able to start to tie together what some of those parts of the brain did. Right? But we tend to frown upon doing that on purpose. All right. Let's see, we only have 5 minutes left. Let's stop there. We know where it's located. We've got biological clock versus circadian rhythm.